Welcome to Moving Beyond Record Hints, where we will be talking about first steps into original research. This is part 2 in a 3-part series. My name is Jenny Hansen, and I'm an accredited genealogist. RootsTech has asked me to remind you that the contents of this video and all of the thoughts, views, and opinions that I express belong to me. I don't necessarily reflect the views of FamilySearch and RootsTech. In the first part of this series, we talked about research readiness. We reviewed the meanings behind some of the genealogy words that we hear all the time in this field. We looked at the FamilySearch Research Wiki, and we talked about why you would want your own personal research software program to be able to manage your family tree. Well, in this second part of the series, we'll be introducing basic research methodology. This will help you know how to approach getting started on your own personal research. When we start doing research, the first step is to ask yourself, what do I know? I know this seems really obvious, but asking ourselves what we know may save us a lot of time and effort before we even get hunting in the records. Most everyone seems to have access to some type of a family record when they begin. Typically that's the form of a pedigree chart or family group sheets. You might be generating the forms yourself. You might have old copies that somebody else created. Either way, we know that our parents and hopefully our grandparents have given us information about themselves that we can get started with. The question of what you know is a little bit deeper than just what do you know. We have access to information that tells us about our ancestors, and these are the home sources that we talked about in part 1 of this series. You might have some family heirlooms that tell the story about your family. You may have a photo collection. Think about the things that you have in your home that might provide you some information about your ancestry. I have a box of information that my grandma collected that just sits in my storage room. While I know the names and the dates of her ancestors, she collected more information that tells stories about these people. So I need to learn more about what she collected by sorting through that box and absorbing all those details. That's a project I'm going to get to one day. It just hasn't happened yet. Another part of what we know can be found in the minds of our family members. So think about everybody that you know who has some information about your family. This might include aunts, uncles, siblings, parents, even family friends. Who might know something about your family? Now, I want you to think about that list of people and arrange them based on their age. You could use this as the order of priority for the people that you need to talk to about your family. Getting the family stories and the oral history of your family before you start jumping into records can save a lot of time and effort with your research. When we consider the questions of what do we know, it can have a lot broader meaning than just what do you know off the top of your head. Think of these easy sources that you have access to that will help you out as you start a new line, and that includes family trees compiled on different genealogy websites. I've had this situation I'm about to describe happen to me many times. A new researcher will approach and say, I've got questions for you. I'm so excited to get started. I've got a 4-generation pedigree chart, so now what do I do? Where do I start? Well, there's not really a formula about where to start your research. Hopefully, while you've been collecting the information around your house or from your relatives, you've created a list of questions that you might want answered, and this is an excellent starting point. What do you want to know? I want to share with you the golden rule before you get started with your family research. We always work from the known to the unknown. I know that seems really weird to have that be like the golden rule, but let me elaborate a bit. What I mean by this is what we want to work with is the proven facts back into the things that we don't know. So we've all got great family stories. Let's imagine that you have a story that tells your family being descended from Abraham Lincoln. So don't start working at Abraham Lincoln and try to force the connection. Start with your parents, then with your grandparents, and just keep moving back. And if that information links you to the family story, then you are so lucky. That's awesome. Sometimes we find information that will disprove a family story, and that's okay too, even though it can kind of be hard to reckon with that. We just want to build on solid facts so that we know that our results are reliable. There's also a few other techniques to help you decide what you want to know. One tool that I've come to love is using timelines. When you look at an ancestor, create a basic timeline including all of the event dates and locations that you have for that individual. You could then review that timeline and start looking for the gaps. Filling in gaps is a great place to start doing research. Part of making your timeline will include considering the different historical events that impacted your ancestor's life. So this is an important step that you don't want to forget. Some events that might change your ancestor's life would include things like war, famine or food shortage, changes in an industry in the area. Think of things like the railroads and mechanization, different religious movements. If you had an ancestor that was living in the southern U.S. during the U.S. Civil War, I would really recommend starting your research somewhere else because so many of those local records were destroyed during that time period. So let the historical context of your ancestor's life help steer your research goals so that you can be practical and set yourself up for some success. Another hint that I have for you is to not start in a place where no one else has been successful. I have so many beginners that come to me and tell me that they're going to start working on this brick wall in their family tree that no one's ever been able to solve. They look at that dead end as a perfect starting point, but I think that's a terrible idea. You're starting with the hardest part. You should start somewhere that is simple and work up to the difficult parts, even if that means that you're repeating some information that you already know. Why not start with things that are easy while you're trying to learn the process and then move on to the more difficult things as you feel more confident in your skills? Think about the history of the area where your ancestor was living and what was going on that time and what records could have been generated by the events in their life. I also want you to think about the records that could have been destroyed. Like I mentioned, things in the U.S. South that were destroyed during the U.S. Civil War. Thinking through these different situations that impacted your ancestor can help you have success right out of the gate, and that is the best case scenario. The third question to ask in the research process is, where do I find information that I want? So this is where we get into looking at the actual record sources. Let's talk about how to evaluate different sources that we might find. I want to help you understand the sources that are going to be best for supporting the information in your tree. Some of the terms that were introduced in part 1 were primary sources and secondary sources. Just to remind you, a primary source is something that was created at the time of an event. A secondary source was created after an event. And our goal is to try to find a primary source for every vital event for everyone in our family. That is way too ambitious, and it's not going to be possible. Either records weren't created or records were destroyed. There's just always some spot where you can't find all the vital records for somebody. There's always going to be a hiccup. So these are times that the secondary records are a great fit. And a lot of times the secondary records add details that just getting those vital facts in there will completely miss over. So many times 2 different record types can state similar information about an ancestor, but the information is not totally the same. There can be some discrepancy between the records. If there's ever conflicting information in the records, we've got to evaluate what source is going to most likely be correct. Well, a primary source will typically trump a secondary source because it's more likely that that record made at the time of the event by someone witnessing the event will be a little bit more true. Here's just an example. A birth record could definitely be more trusted than a census record or even an obituary if you're looking for information about somebody's birth date and place. Hopefully that makes sense, that those other records, while they might have truth to them, if there's a discrepancy between a birth record and something created later, that birth record would definitely trump the other information. Another part of evaluating sources is recognizing different types of sources that we would see online. So today we can do so much of our research online, and it's awesome. But not everything that we see online is actually the best source available. There's so many indexes created and other types of databases. So when we do searches on sites like FamilySearch, often the positive hit would link us to an index. Well, An index is a source that's created by looking at the main record and pulling just the most basic parts without all the details. If you're going to attach an index entry to your tree, then you haven't really added too much. Follow those leads from the index back to the original source. A transcription is a record that's created by writing out everything from the original source. Essentially, it's a copy of the information that we find in the original. Transcriptions are really quite helpful, but the major downfall of a transcription is that there's room for error when we look beyond an original source. An extraction is created by pulling the most important parts of an original record. So one example that really comes to mind with an extraction would be if I were looking at a will. I would make an extraction by taking the name of the deceased, the dates listed in there, which would likely include the death date as well as the probate date, and then it would list all of the names written in the will. You can see how that could be a helpful source, but I still want to go back to that original will. I want to see all the details. I want to see relationships explained. I don't just want the high-level information. When I started doing genealogy, we had to either look on microfilm or microfiche or go off-site for research from the Family History Library. We would write to courthouses all the time, trying to get copies of records. We had to request information from different jurisdictional agencies all the time. It was a gigantic pain. Well, things have improved so much in the past decade, even in the last 20 years, but really just even in the last several years. We have images available online for more and more sources every day. All of the microfilm that's part of the Family History Library collection has been digitally imaged and made available to you online. When you look at sources today, you can find images that replicate that original document. You don't even have to leave your home to get it. So I'd like to show you the main landing pages for a few different websites that are helpful for research. This is by no means the only place we're going to find records. You can find these web pages and more on the syllabus that I have linked to this video. But I just want to make you aware of some of the types of places that you'll be finding information. So of course, FamilySearch. When we land on the FamilySearch main page, you want to choose that Search tab, and then from the drop-down menu, choose Catalog. From the catalog, I can choose any location in the world. I just type it in. So for today's example, I chose Warren, Missouri. And when I hit select, I'm going to get to see all the different records available for that area. I'm interested in looking at marriages, so I want to choose the Vital Records option. And then from the Vital Records, I have this list of marriages. You can see there's a camera icon on the right side of the screen, and that indicates that the record images are available for this entry just by clicking that icon. When I clicked on the camera, I go directly to an image for the marriages that I want to search. From this page, I can browse images in the collection and find any record that I might need for my family tree. Another incredibly helpful site is ancestry.com. When you select their search tab, you have the option of choosing the different record types that you want. So similar to FamilySearch, when you go to the desired record type, you're going to see a link for the images to those records. Ancestry also hosts many indexes and a lot of different record transcriptions. So use those to help find your way around the original record images. You don't have to just dump directly into the big books full of marriages or whatever you're looking at. There's all these different helps built in that make it easier to navigate the giant books. Another really helpful site is myheritage.com. Ancestry kind of has the upper hand on the US sources, but I think of MyHeritage as being a better global collection. Both sites are improving what they don't have, so look at both of them, but just to spotlight them. Again, you're going to choose the the research tab to find the options for the different record types that you could look at. When you select the record group that you want, you're going to again see links to the images. They also have a lot of helpful indexes and transcriptions, like I mentioned, that can be helpful for navigating these larger record groups. If you're doing research within the US, you really should check out the US Gen website. So this site is managed by volunteers, as you see right there splashed across the page. Everything here is available for free. The site is arranged by state, and then it's broken down by county within each state. Each county has a county coordinator. The thoroughness and all the information on that page just depends on the group of volunteers supporting the efforts. Some counties have fantastic collections and others are really sparse. But you'll find information unique to US GenWeb. Things like probate indexes and cemetery indexes are really abundant on here because local genealogy societies work together and collect this information and then post it here. There are similar sites to this project for different countries all around the world. That's where we come into places like Google. You'll want to do a web search for an area that you're interested in researching. You might be surprised at what you find. Even a record group housed on one of these big conglomerate sites, Google can be the easiest way to find what you're looking for because you're not going to have to weed through their built-in tools of navigation. You can just go directly to that record type. You can also try searching for things like family associations or surname publications. I've introduced you to different concepts behind the research process and addressed how to get started going on your research. We talked about source evaluation and the types of records that you want for your ancestors. And we've even looked at a few different ways to find those records. So in the final part of this series, we're going to talk about some of the specific record groups that you're going to use in your research. This should set you up to successfully start doing your own research and move beyond just using record hints supplied by these big websites. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of First Steps in Original Research.